Now, what's your story? You're from Texas. Some people in Ohio say, well, I don't care what's going on in Texas, but you say Ohioans should care about something going on in Texas. What is that?
Well, in Texas, we were the breaking. We actually broke the ground for hydraulic fracturing. In the little town of Dish, where I was mayor at, hydraulic fracturing was developed about 15 miles to the west, or at least the hydraulic fracturing that's used in the shale plays here in America. And so we've been doing this for quite some time. And so the question would be is, do you want what has happened to you or happened to us to happen to you? And if not, then what are you going to do to prevent that? And so you can look at what we've had in the Barnett Shale, and you can use that as a roadmap to where you're going to end up in 10 or 15 years from now if you just stand by and don't do anything about it.
So what happened in your area?
Well, in Dish in particular, Dish is located just outside of the edge of the urban sprawl. And so it became a very popular route for pipelines that transport the gas out of the Barnett Shale. Most of the gas that is produced in the Barnett Shale actually comes through Dish at some point or another. And so we have a lot of natural gas pipelines. A lot of these are 36-inch transmission lines. We also have compression station. We also have gas treatment. Natural gas does not come out of the ground as the cleanest burning hydrocarbon. It has to go through a process to remove all the impurities. That's done right in Dish. The gas is odorized. Of course, pure methane is not odorized, does not have an odor, so it's odorized right in Dish, and it's shipped out into the system. Along with that, we also have about 20 production wells in our 2 square miles and about 50 or 60 or so within a half mile of our borders. So we've pretty well got every single aspect of natural gas production that happens just inside of our corporate limits.
Well, here in Ohio, a lot of people would say that sounds like it will create a lot of jobs, and we're hungry for jobs, so let's go for it. What's the downside?
Well, strangely enough, not too many people in the town of Dish actually benefit from this industry at all. There's a couple of folks who have contracting jobs where they do excavation work, things like that. Most of the people who own their minerals have moved away, have sold that property and moved away and retained their mineral rights, so they've moved away somewhere else. And so what does this mean when it all comes to town? Well, you have things like truck traffic. You have very heavy truck traffic, and there's going to be a lot of trucks. There's going to be, hundreds of thousands of wells, and each one of those wells has a tank that has to be emptied every day by a truck. And so you have a lot of truck traffic. What does that do to your roads? Are you going to budget for that? Where's that money going to come from? Those are questions that you should be asking here in Ohio, because at some point it will happen. It will happen here. So it's something that you guys need to be thinking about.
The governor says he is thinking about that, and he's proposing some fees on the drillers. Take that money, give it to local towns. They'll use it to fix up their roads.
And I've heard that story before. I've traveled to several places here in the United States, and as well as Canada and some of the other places where this is going on, and I've heard that, and it never seems to be implemented exactly the way that it's anticipated. And so, am I coming up here to tell you to do this or not to do this? Absolutely not. That's a decision that people in Ohio have to make. I can tell you what happened in Dish, and you can make that decision based on trying to figure out the entire story. I think if you go away thinking that there is going to be zero impact and everything is going to be fine, then that's false, because there is going to be some impact. Even at best, you have an industrialized area, and you have the things such as the truck traffic and the heavy equipment and the noise and the odors and the dust and the things like that. At worst, you have people who have contaminated water wells, and you have air pollution from these treatment facilities and these compression stations and these condensate tanks that leak and things like that. So there's a variety of issues that you have to think about. Every single place I've been to says we have the regulation infrastructure to take care of this. If I had a nickel for every time that someone has told me that, I'd be rich, because I hear it everywhere. And I have yet to see it prevent a lot of the things that you see and hear about.
Just in the last couple of days, Governor John Kasich has promised there will be new rules, tougher rules on fracking.
Well, and I hope that that's the case. That would be certainly a good start. And I think that one thing that he may want to consider is to bring people such as those people who are environmentalists, if you will. I don't necessarily consider myself an environmentalist, but get some of those groups involved in making of those regulations. Don't just go out and grab a bunch of people from the industry whose paychecks depend upon those regulations. Get some other people involved in the process so that you can have it looked at from a variety of different angles. That's my suggestion.
The oil and gas industry keeps telling us there have been no confirmed cases where horizontal fracking has caused major environmental problems.
Well, and I've heard that for 5 or 6 years now, and every time that you come up with something, the bar moves. And so if you see water that's been contaminated, or you see a community like Dish that has air contamination, the bar always moves, and then it has to be proven in a court, or it has to be proven by a governmental agency. Well, then when the governmental agency proves that it's a problem, then the bar shifts to something else. And so I don't think that they're ever going to admit to that. I think if they would just stop and think about what they're doing, and what's that old saying? You can't ever fix the problem until you admit there's a problem. And so they actually have started saying here more recently that there have been environmental impacts. They're not blaming it on the fracturing itself. They're blaming it on some of the associated activities that go on with it. And so they're starting to come to that. But if they don't ever admit, then we can never find out what caused the problem so that it doesn't happen again. Just saying that it's never happened is wrong. And to say that it couldn't be done safe, I don't know the answer to that, but it's never going to be done safe if we don't start holding them accountable to what they do, and the industry themselves taking responsibility.
How bad is the pollution that you say is taking place there, and you blame it on fracking?
In Dish, you mean? In Dish, like I said, we have a huge treatment facility, compressor station bank, that it started out with these just very rancid odors. And these odors were caused from glycol dehydration, where they remove the impurities and dump it overboard into the air. And so we had tremendously high levels of several carcinogens and neurotoxins and things like this. And we went in and, of course, did some testing on our own, found a lot of different chemicals that were elevated above safety standards. And we brought that to the attention of the state regulatory agencies and the industry themselves. We now have a permanent monitor that's been installed by the state of Texas in Dish, and almost every single company over there, there's about 7 total companies, about 4 of them have installed major emission controls. And so they're doing it a whole lot better than they were doing it 5 years ago. And so what's it going to take here in Ohio? Are you going to start with them putting those emission controls on, or are you going to wait until people start complaining to do it?
I want to be clear here. We've had fracking, vertical fracking, for decades and decades, 50, 60 years. What's relatively new is the horizontal fracking. Is that what you're talking about is going on in your area, horizontal fracking?
Right, and the fracking that they've been using for 40 or 50 years is different than the fracking that they're using in the shales. The shales is a much tighter, much denser formation, and so they're using a lot higher pressures and a different mix of chemicals to do that. And this is not the fracking that they were doing in 1947 in Belma, Oklahoma. It's different, and this particular kind of fracking was developed about 15 years ago. It was in the late 90s down in the Barnett Shale, not too far from Dish, and that's where the horizontal drilling was also perfected. The vertical drilling into the shales has been going on down there since the late 90s. It was around 2000, 2001 when they started the horizontal, and that's what really made it economically beneficial for them to do, is when they were able to do it horizontally.
Are you seeing an economic boom around your town?
In the town of Dish, I've actually moved from Dish because of some of the issues that were attributed to the compressor station. I'm still actively involved there. I still have a very good relationship with the current mayor there, and so as far as an economic boom, no, there's not an economic boom. And frankly, it has hurt our ability to grow as a community. Let's take a pipeline. A pipeline company in the state of Texas has the power of eminent domain. And so you have an area that's an open field. If you're a growing and developing community, and the pipeline company, they want the quickest, what's at the straightest line between 2 points. That's the most economical thing for them to do. And so they put it wherever they want to put it, and there's not a whole lot that the property owners can do about that. Well, that may be your next commercial district. That may be where the new shopping mall is going to go. However, once that pipeline's there, you can never put anything on top of that. You can't put a tree on it. The only thing you can put on it is shallow growing crops, so it's always a field. Well, if you get a dozen of these that have a 100-foot easement, now you got a 1,200-foot easement going across your community, but it's not all in one area, it's all crisscrossed, and so that prevents you from being able to grow. And then, of course, no one wants to live in an area where it stinks all the time. No one really wants to live in an industrial area. And so we've had to overcome some of those challenges just to maintain positive growth in the community.
What do you do with the waste fluids from fracking in Texas?
The waste fluids there's a couple of different things that they do with those. One thing they do is called land farming, where they spread it out over a land and they mush it up, and then they let it dry, and then they do injection wells. And there's a significant amount of injection wells in Texas. And
do you have them in your community, injection wells?
None right in our community. No, there was one proposed, and we disputed that, and it was never drilled. One thing with injection wells, you have, of course, the risk of contamination, and a lot of these have open pits where they dump the water and then it's injected, and so if you have flooding, things like that, so that's one problem. But another problem is that you may have 100 or 200 trucks a day coming in there, so you need to have an infrastructure that's able to take that, and in our area we just simply didn't have that.
Have you had any fracking related earthquakes in Texas?
There have been some down in Fort Worth, just south of DFW Airport, that were attributed to the injection wells, not fracking itself. I haven't heard of anything. I think there's been earthquakes all around the country, and they seem to indicate that there is some relation to the injection wells.
Okay, and can you just give 2 or 3 just practical, here your state of Ohio, make sure you're doing this before this industry comes in and sets up shop?
Well, you need to listen to all points of view, and you need to do as much research as you possibly can. Don't take my word for it. Don't take the industry's word for it. Go out and find the answers yourself, because the answers are out there, and if you do a little research, you can find out what you need to make an educated decision, because unfortunately a lot of the folks don't make an educated decision. They just make a decision. And if you're out there signing a lease, get some help in signing that lease. Don't just do that on your own, because someone is getting compensated to get the best deal, not for you, but for the company. And when someone shows up on your doorstep with a checkbook ready to write you a check, that should be a hint to you that there's more to this than that. And that's another avenue where you can put in controls to maybe help this be less of an impact on you and your neighbors, as opposed to just signing whatever lease they show up with, which essentially gives them all of your property rights. And so those are a couple of things that people need to think about, and look at other areas where this is being done. Go visit them. Come down to Dish, Texas, and I'll give you a tour. And you can see if this is what you want in your community.
Dish, D-I-S-H.
D-I-S-H.